Welcome to Talk Wave, making waves, one talk at a time.
All right, so picture this. You got a 17-year-old girl going to concerts, hanging out with friends. It looks like she's living a pretty normal life, but here's the catch. She's in a wheelchair after a car crash that killed her boyfriend and their friend.
Yeah, that's the case of Mackenzie Shirilla, and it's one that really digs deep into the human psyche. I mean, how do you reconcile a seemingly normal teenager with a horrific act like this?
Yeah. And that's what we're going to do today in our deep dive. We're going to try to unpack what led to her conviction for murder and the chilling details that shocked even the judge.
Right, we've got court records, body cam footage, news reports, all painting a pretty disturbing picture of what might have been going on in her mind.
So let's start with the crash itself, just the bare bones of what happened.
Okay, so Shirilla was driving her car with her boyfriend, 20-year-old Dominic Russo, and their friend, 19-year-old Davion Flanagan, in the car.
Yeah.
And she drives straight into a brick wall at 100 miles per hour.
100 miles per hour, that's just insane.
It is Russo and Flanagan. They were killed instantly. Shirilla, she survived, but obviously with serious injuries. That's why she was in the wheelchair.
Yeah, and it's that image of her in the wheelchair at concerts and parties that just doesn't sit right, does it?
It's a tough one to wrap your head around. I mean, you have these families grieving the loss of their sons, and then you see Shirilla seemingly, enjoying life.
Like nothing happened.
Exactly, and it creates this jarring contrast between the tragedy and her actions.
And there's the body cam footage from her arrest.
Yeah.
I mean, this is right after this horrific crash. 2 people are dead, and she's worried about her jewelry.
Right, she's begging the officers not to break her bracelet. It's bizarre.
And on top of that, she falls asleep in the police cruiser on the way to the station. I mean, what do we even make of that?
Well, it's one of those things that could be interpreted in so many ways, right? Some people might see it as callous indifference, a sign of guilt, maybe even something more disturbing. But we also have to consider the possibility of shock trauma. Maybe it's a delayed reaction, a coping mechanism we don't really know for sure.
It definitely raises a lot of questions. And the prosecution used her behavior to build their case, arguing that she had a motive.
Yeah, they pointed to a tumultuous relationship with Russo, suggesting she might have wanted out of it and that this was an act of revenge.
It's a chilling thought, and the prosecution's statement that she took everyone in the car with her really drives that point home.
Absolutely. It speaks to intent, which was crucial for the prosecution's case. They had to prove that this wasn't just reckless driving, it was deliberate.
And the judge clearly agreed. I mean, her statement at sentencing was powerful. She called Shirilla's actions controlled, methodical, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful.
Those are strong words.
She was convinced that this was murder, not an accident.
Which means the prosecution must have presented a pretty airtight case, forensic evidence, expert testimony, and maybe even Shirilla's behavior all pointing to her intent.
But then there's Shirilla's apology in court. She expresses regret for what happened to the victims and their families, claims she doesn't remember the crash itself.
Right, so is that genuine remorse, or is it a calculated attempt to sway the judge?
Or could she actually be telling the truth about the memory loss? I mean, we know trauma can have some pretty strange effects on the brain.
Definitely. That's where things get really complicated. You have to consider the possibility of dissociative amnesia, where someone blocks out a traumatic event as a way to cope.
So we're left with this case that's just full of contradictions and unanswered questions.
Right. We've explored the details, the behavior, the legal arguments, the potential role of trauma, but ultimately it's hard to know for sure what was going on in Shirilla's mind.
And then you think about the families of the victims they're dealing with, an unimaginable loss, while seeing the perpetrator seemingly moving on with her life. It's just heartbreaking.
It really highlights the lasting impact of these kinds of tragedies and the search for meaning and justice that follows.
This deep dive has forced us to confront some really difficult questions about human nature, the fragility of life, and the complexities of justice.
It's a case that sticks with you, and I think it's important to reflect on the weight of Shirilla's actions, the impact on the victims' families, and the mystery of what truly happened that night.
As you process everything we've talked about today, think about this. Is it ever possible to fully understand the motivations behind such a horrific act?
And how do we balance the need for justice with the possibility of rehabilitation, especially when it comes to young offenders?
These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they're worth wrestling with as we try to make sense of this tragic case.
Absolutely. It's a case that raises more questions than it answers and leaves us grappling with the dark side of human nature and the complexities of the justice system.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Mackenzie Shirilla case. It's a story that will stay with us for a long time.
And as always, we encourage you to keep exploring these issues and to think critically about the cases that shape our understanding of the world around us.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the most compelling stories of our time.
Until then, stay curious and keep asking questions.